Hey everyone. So earlier this week we had two very sad things happen in the UK government, or perhaps I should say last week, if you consider Sunday to be the first day of a new week. Those two things were the enabling of euthanasia for people who are terminally ill, and the other thing before that was essentially widening the window for abortion. So abortion wasn't legalized, strictly speaking, because it was already legal in this country under certain circumstances. But the window was widened from 24 weeks being the limit to the point of birth being the limit, or just before birth. That's why I didn't immediately react to the abortion law change, because, as I just said, they haven't changed anything in terms of legalizing it. It has already been legal. Not completely legal yet, but pretty much legal if you can convince two doctors to sign off on it. And I'm sure it can't be that difficult to find two doctors in this country who would accept that you need to have an abortion. Mental health reasons could possibly be a reason for that. If you can convince your doctor that you have mental health issues and continuing on with this pregnancy and having this baby is going to send you on a downward trajectory when it comes to your mental health, I'm sure you'll find a couple of doctors who'll sign off on that. And interestingly, as you probably won't be surprised to learn, this isn't the end of it. Many people on the left are not satisfied with this, even though The Guardian wrote here, MPs vote to decriminalise abortion in step forward for reproductive rights, celebrating this vote in Parliament. You can see that members of the Labour Party are not happy with this. Here's an article from Stella Creasy in that very party, titled "Abortion Remains a Criminal Offence in the UK because of the left's timidity. We must learn from that and fast." So she isn't happy with the left not going far enough on this issue. And I'll read you a couple of paragraphs from her opinion piece. On Tuesday, Parliament had the opportunity to set abortion in England and Wales on the same modern regulated footing as it is in Northern Ireland, as a human right. Instead, a vote on this was explicitly blocked by the providers of this service and their supporters, telling MPs to back another amendment to get a single exemption from prosecution for women over the line instead. That is what happened. And then she writes, in contrast, her proposed amendment would have gone further, offering protection to all those involved in ensuring that women can access safe and legal abortions. In the current Parliament, any pro-choice amendment would have passed. A critical opportunity not just to stop the destructive prosecutions and investigations under outdated laws of everyone, including medics, but to also protect access for 250,000 who have an abortion every year, has been missed. As a result, the laws that make abortion a criminal act remain, ready to be exploited by those who wish to attack access should they come to power. And so, as you could see there, it isn't like this has been voted through and that's it. They're satisfied now and they won't do any more. They're going to keep pushing until abortion is completely legal, until a woman can have an abortion up to birth for any reason, because it's her body, her choice. It's interesting when it comes to abortion that so many believe a woman has a right to end the life of her baby in her womb because it's her body, her choice. And yet we've had cases in this country where a child has been dying in hospital and the parents wanted to take the child out of that hospital and to a hospital in another country where they actually said they would try and keep the child alive, and the hospital in the UK did not permit them to do that. They did not permit them to take their own child out of the hospital and said, no, the child must die here. Now, you might find the next thing I'm about to say a little bit strange, but I want to make the case for why the abortion of a child isn't necessarily an awful thing for the child. Just to be clear, I am not arguing that abortion should be legalized. I'm not arguing that the church should change its teaching on abortion. It's still something that is wrong. But what I am saying is, if an abortion takes place, maybe for the child it isn't necessarily a terrible thing. Before I do that, I want to briefly bring in limbo here, and you'll see why in just a moment. First of all, here are two clips. So these two clips are from a debate that took place a number of years ago. It was Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry going up against Archbishop John Onaikan and Anne Widdecombe. And the motion was the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. And of course, the two atheists, Hitchens and Fry, were arguing that it isn't. And both Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry brought up limbo. Now, the reason they brought up limbo was because they wanted to show that among a number of terrible teachings, this was a terrible teaching by the Catholic Church.
I'm pleased to see that due reconsideration is now being given, and may in fact have been given, to the hellish, I choose the word carefully, doctrine of limbo, St. Augustine's cruel and stupid disposal problem, solution to a non-existent problem, that is to say, the destination of the souls of unbaptized children. Up until now, Catholic parents have been taught that's where their unbaptized children went.
Limbo, it seems so tedious and so silly, one of those little casuistic games that Thomists and others play. Aquinas and Augustine of Hippo both proposed this extraordinary idea that babies who were unbaptized would not know heaven.
It was a widely believed doctrine in the Catholic Church, but of course there is a difference between doctrine and dogma. This is something I had to actually check myself because I wasn't sure. I had believed in the past that the Catholic Church taught limbo as a dogma, and so it was a little bit confusing to me that now that dogma had just vanished and was no longer a thing. But then I realized it was actually doctrine. As you can see, dogma is a subset of doctrine. Doctrine refers to the broader body of teachings and beliefs of a particular religion or group, while dogma is a specific declared doctrine that is considered divinely revealed and is required to be believed by the faithful. And limbo was never dogma, i.e. this wasn't a divinely revealed doctrine that is an absolute truth you have to believe in order to be a Catholic. It was never an official thing that came from God, if you like, and perhaps the Holy Spirit specifically made sure that it never became dogma because it wasn't really true. Now, the reason why I mention that and why I believe it's significant is because with what I'm about to say, it's really important to understand that when a child is aborted, is killed, it won't be going to this place called limbo, where supposedly it would be happy, but it would never be with God. It would be this place that isn't hell, it isn't heaven. It's a place of happiness, but it's a place where you can never be close to God, where you can never know God, because you haven't been baptized. The church now teaches that what happens to an infant that dies before being baptized basically depends on the mercy of God. And since we believe God is very merciful, I would say it's very likely that this child would end up in heaven, because there are only 3 places it can go. He or she isn't going to go to hell because they haven't committed any sins. How can you send a child to hell when they haven't committed a sin? It's also very unlikely they would go to purgatory, because again, you would need to have committed some sins for that. Unless you would consider the fact that the child not being baptized meant it didn't have the original sin washed away that it was born with, and so therefore it does have that one sin, and maybe it needs to spend a very short amount of time in purgatory before going to heaven. Even that sounds rather harsh, and it's much more likely that this child simply, because of God's mercy, goes to heaven. And so that is important in conjunction with what I'm about to say. So I'm going to give you a scenario here. And the reason I'm giving you this specific scenario is because this is the most common reason that women in the UK have an abortion. And that is when they find out that the child in their womb has some kind of serious disability. So for that reason, I'm giving you this scenario. Let's say that a woman is pregnant and she finds out that the child in her womb has a serious disability. And after a consultation with her doctor, she decides that she actually wants to have the child aborted, have the child killed. And the child does get aborted and dies. As I said before, that still remains a bad thing to do. It's against the teaching of the church, and the teaching of the church should not change on that. But while what the woman has done is a terrible thing, has it worked out that terribly for the child? Because what the child has essentially avoided here is, 1, living a life of suffering. If they were going to be born with a serious disability, their life would have generally been filled with suffering. And 2, the occasion to sin. They have avoided any possibility of committing a sin, assuming they were able-bodied enough to be able to commit a sin, and they had some kind of capacity for reason, they would have opportunities during their life to sin. So this child has avoided a life of suffering and sin. They've bypassed that entirely and then gone directly to heaven. That's why I'm suggesting that perhaps this abortion hasn't worked out that badly for the child, because they've avoided the suffering and sin of life and they've just gone straight up to heaven to be with God. What do you think of that? That's the logic I'm using here. You may think that it's flawed, and I am interested to see what you have to say on this. Again, I do repeat that I'm not suggesting that because of this the church should permit abortion. I, as a Catholic, of course, accept church teaching. The church is the authority, and whatever thoughts and reason of my own I may use, it isn't anything compared to divine reason. But what I'm saying is that perhaps we shouldn't despair for the children who get aborted, because they will most probably be going to heaven. Now, of course, one could say that you can't really tell that a baby in the womb has a serious disability until they are a few months old at least, and then if you decide to have an abortion, one of the evils is going to be that this baby is going to be hurt, because you're going to have to stab the baby in the womb. So I do take that on board. Nevertheless, you could still argue that that's a brief moment of pain, but then, once again, as I said before, the child bypasses a life of suffering and potential to sin and goes straight to heaven to be with God, assuming that's where they go. And I do understand that that isn't church teaching officially. That's just my assumption, based on the fact that I don't believe this child could go to hell or to purgatory having not committed a sin, even though it hasn't been baptized. So let me know what you think about that, folks. Thanks very much for watching the video. Have a blessed day.